Well, I'm Heinz in Kirksville, Missouri. I've lived in Kirksville since 1978, and this is where, through Truman State University, I met my wonderful wife, Mary Lou, and we got married. Several years after meeting, joined our two families and raised first 5 and then the 6th child here. And for my part, this country has given me tremendous opportunities all along, starting in 1953 when my mother and I immigrated to the United States, to Milford, Connecticut, from Elmshorn in northern Germany, a little bit north of Hamburg. And we arrived, as luck or fate would have it, on Friday the 13th, March 13, 1953, on Mary Lou's birthday.
Oh,
So we assume we were fated to
I-
be together.
completely agree.
We met in Kirksville. And I often think that I was part of that process of moving west that my grandparents started when they came from Italy, both on my father's side of the family and my mother's side of the family. And of course, I wasn't the one that had to make those trips, and I sometimes wonder if I would have done what Heinz and his mother did, which is get on those ships and cross the Atlantic Ocean to come to this new place where no one spoke the language.
My mother was the courageous one, the adventurous one. I, on the other hand, had a wonderful time on the ship that we came over on. It was a Swedish-American line ship, passenger ship, named the Gripsholm, and we left from Bremerhaven in Germany, stopped in Halifax, Canada, and then in New York City, where we got off. My mother was seasick a lot of the time, which left me free to run around the ship. I was 8 and a half, and I had a wonderful time. I made friends with some of the crew. They took me down to the engine room, showed me around. We were in tourist class, the lowest level of the ship, literally. But for some reason, I was able to become friendly with the captain's crew and was able to eat with them. So I had a great time.
That's fantastic.
This is the MS Gripsholm, a photo thereof, taken sometime after my mother and I sailed on it to come to the United States. And the bottom row of portholes, more toward the back, is where my mother and I were. And the farther back in the ship you are, the more likely you are to become seasick. The middle is not quite as bad, but either end is. So we were in the back, in the bottom. And I remember during the storm at one point, everything in the cabin, which was very small, was just tossed everywhere. And I thought it was exciting. My mother thought it was horrible, a disaster. My poor mother.
I suppose the point about immigrants and coming to the United States is, why did you want to do that? And in Heinz's case, of course, there was a really good reason for coming. It was at the end of World War II. And at that point, Germany was not in a very good place. And you remember some of being there.
Yes, I remember quite a bit of living in Germany, even in the late 40s and early 50s. I went to a school which was partially bombed out. And everything in between our house and the school, which was quite a walk, had been leveled. but I didn't know any better than that. And so I went to school, went to first grade and second grade. Then when I came to the United States in March, I didn't go to school right away, but entered school in the fall, right after Labor Day, into third grade. I didn't know any English. Everyone was, as far as I could tell, very nice to me and said good things. And as any child can, I picked up English fairly quickly and eventually enjoyed being in the United States.
And that's where I think the story is a little bit different about his school experience, because the school experience that I always learned from my grandmother was that she had learned to read and write and was well on her way in school, but when she came to the United States, she was teased, harassed mercilessly, and eventually she quit going to school. It wasn't worth it because of the way she was treated.
Yes, in Milford, Connecticut, which is where my uncle, one of my father's brothers, they were on opposite sides of the war. My uncle Vanna lived in Milford, and he had a factory, a machine factory, and he made parts for the American government to use in the war. Screws, nuts, bolts, that sort of thing. And my father was in the German Navy, including in the submarine service, U-boat, and he was very lucky that he survived. Me too. So Uncle Vanna came in the 1930s, my father's brother, at the behest and the sponsorship of my father's and Vanna's sister, Liddy, who lived in New York City.
Okay.
And she had come in, I don't know whether it was the late 20s, I don't remember, or the early 30s. And she had married Hans from Germany, and the two of them sponsored Vanna to come over. My father decided not to come over right away, and then the war came and it was too late, and so they were on opposite sides. He had another brother as well, Helmut, who had come to the United States in the 30s and wound up in the United States Army and in the OSS, which was a precursor of the CIA, and worked as a spy for the Americans while my father, whose name was also Heinz, was in the German war machine.
Boy.
Anyway, I was not aware of any of that as a child. So the reason we moved to Milford was because of my uncle, Vanna, who had that factory, where my father worked for a while and then he got a job elsewhere. I was very lucky to go into a very good school system in Milford and had all the advantages of a great public education. And so today I have benefited from being in the public schools all those years, right through high school, then into college, like Mary Lou, the first one in my family, and eventually got a doctorate in Colorado, applied for work, was interviewed by then Northeast Missouri State University, came here.
And the rest is history.
The rest is history. My master's degree was in English literature from Colorado State University in Fort Collins. My doctorate was from University of Colorado in Boulder in Old and Middle English Language and Literature.
I feel very lucky to have grown up in Pittsburgh, because Pittsburgh, especially when I was growing up, the late 50s and the 60s, was a very, very diverse city. there were different sections of town. You could find every ethnicity you could possibly imagine represented in the community. And they lived in little enclaves. But that I should say the first generation of people, like my parents who were born in the United States, but whose parents had been born elsewhere, started to move out into the suburbs. So as I grew up in the 60s, we moved out into the suburbs, and I was then surrounded more by people who were Irish, Scotch-Irish descent, Germans, and we talked about that as children growing up. I mean, that was something that you did. I don't think our children know anything about that or really grew up with that sense of, oh, you have this immigrant background. That just wasn't part of it. I know that my family always felt this sense of inferiority. In my father's family, they tried to anglicize their names. So, for instance, my dad's sister, who was born Maria Antonia, my uncle changed her name to Ethel. But I think community and I think diversity within the community makes you stronger and makes you look at the world differently when the faces that you see are different, the cultures that you see are different.
But I think the university, Truman State University, and also to a certain extent ATSU, helps the community in attracting people of diverse backgrounds. And that's a good thing. Diversity of opinion, diversity of knowledge, diversity of skills, of attitudes, as long as they're positive. Those are all good things. And I think this community, as Mary Lou said, is growing in that direction.
What?
After the war, became an engineer for the German railroad. So he, in those days, actually drove trains. And he had a fireman in the cab who would stoke the furnace. Or my father took me on a ride, I remember this one time, and I was little, must have been in the late 40s, 1940s. He took me from Elmshorn to the town right on the Danish border called Celle, and back again, fortunately. And it was exciting riding in the steam engine.
Yes.
And he was pulling a freight train. When he came to the United States, as I said, he worked for his brother, Vanna, as a laborer in the machine shop, and then ultimately had a job which lasted the rest of his working career in a town close to Milford, Ansonia, a larger factory where he was a machinist. My mother eventually got a job working for a company that made locks in Milford, so they were both working. My mother had been an executive secretary in Germany, and she had a very good position until the position evaporated when the shipbuilding factory, the warship building factory where she worked for the CEO, was bombed out of existence. And then she didn't have a job like that. She started working in laundry after that.
Wow.
So in a way, both our families were looking for better opportunities in the United States and got them in the United States.
There are better opportunities, but I guess what I was trying to say about being integrated into society is they had to start by working jobs that maybe other people didn't want. And I think what we don't respect about those who are immigrating or coming in as immigrants to the United States, as refugees to the United States, is that they They are fulfilling and doing jobs that immigrants have always done. They've always started, and they're very interested in having their children then move up the ladder, getting a better education,
Right.
taking on positions that are higher. Heinz's mom was an executive secretary. Well, my dad's sister went on to become an executive secretary here, but her father was a bricklayer when he came. So it was like each generation they assumed would be able to do better. That's hard for any of our children right now in this country, but I think that immigrants still feel that way, despite the fact that we may feel, we're not so sure that our kids are, going to be able to do better given the political situation and the economic situation. But at the same time, I can understand where people coming from other countries where the situations are so bad that for them this is the opportunity to improve, and it is an opportunity for their children to be raised in an environment that is going to provide them a chance to do better than their parents. And I think that's what America really is. That's what it's all about. And that's why people have always come here, is for that opportunity for a better life.
I think the key for moving up in a society is assimilation, integration, assimilation. Whether you get help learning the language or not, I think it's important for immigrants to learn the language, and I speak from personal experience. You automatically learn the language if you're immersed in it. You can't help it. My parents spoke German at home, at least initially, and then as adults, they learned English, which must have been very difficult. As a kid, it was easy for me, as it is for any child. But we spoke English at home as much as possible. So at the same time that I think immigrants can retain their own identity and a sense of community with their background, it is very important to assimilate into the greater whole. I wouldn't say it's a melting pot, but certainly assimilation into the greater culture is important.
Yes, because each culture contributes to that.
Yes.
And so when you talk about assimilation, it's not assimilation into one particular culture or group.
Yes.
It's this kind of assimilation where we're all making contributions and we create this patchwork that when you look at it as a whole, it becomes something really spectacular. That it's not just, we're all the same and we're all little cookie cutters. That's not what we're going for. It's the idea that you become assimilated. But I think it's always fear of the other. And
Yeah.
I think that has been a problem with immigration in the United States since the beginning.
Yes.
There's always that fear of the other. Stigma. People are given a stigma by the nationality or how you've come in during that immigration trip and what your group represents. And we've just never, we say we're welcoming with the Statue of Liberty, but we haven't always been as welcoming as we could be.
Yeah.
And I don't always understand why we're fearful. I think most people all want the same things.
Of course.
Yes.
They want the same
Yes.
things. They want a good life. They want to be able to raise their children. They want to see their children marry and have families and be happy and be able to support themselves. And I think that's across all cultures. I don't think there's a culture that doesn't, want to see the success of their family and their community. And I think that's the strength of immigrants. If you have people who are willing to do the hard work because they know it's going to be better for the next generation,
Yes.
what more could you ask for in terms of of citizens, of people willing to participate in the community that is the United States of America. That's what you want.
They will be good neighbors.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And of course, I mean, that was the whole idea. We kept establishing communities, and we didn't always go about it in the right way as we went west. But the whole idea was to find that place where you can raise a family, where you can, or not raise a family, be yourself, be able to express yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what it is to be an American, is to be able to express yourself and know that you have the freedom to do that.
I feel very fortunate. I am an immigrant. I went to good public schools, to universities. I became a professor here in Kirksville, and then dean, division head and dean. Was in a position where I could concentrate on making the best possible decision for student education, doing the right things so that students could learn, doing the right things so faculty could teach and cause students to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And that was very rewarding, to watch students and faculty succeed. And then after Mary Lou and I both retired, I was fortunate enough, because of Jack Magruder, to work at ATSU for several years and became a vice president of at that university. It was just incredible. And I really do, I wish that my opa, my grandfather, whom I was very close to in Germany, could see what good things happened to me here in America. No, my opa, my mother's father.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. I am Jack Magruder, and this is my wife, Sue Magruder. Sue and I met each other on the 4th day of June in 1954 on the Truman campus. We were married the 4th day of August 1954. We've had a joyful journey ever since that day. And today we've been asked to speak at this wonderful event, and Sue's going to begin.
There's a lot of talk right now about immigration, and that is the subject of today's activities. I have some thoughts on immigration that go back a long, long way. For example, everybody in this country, with the exception of some of the tribes of Native Americans, came to this country because of conditions in their previous country, their homeland, that were dangerous, poverty-stricken, terrible conditions, which made them compelled to move and look for a better life. Anyone who was perfectly comfortable and well off in the homeland did not come. So for that reason, we all have a similar story. The Magruder immigration story starts in 1652, and that's quite a distance back. The Alexander McGruther, the name was, that was the first ancestor of Jack's that came to this country, was captured in a battle in Scotland and sent to the colonies by the English captors as an indentured servant. He was sent to what we know as Maryland, where over time he acquired some land and became a family immigrant here in this country and established the family that came to be known as the Magruders. Over time, they moved westward with the westward movement into Virginia, Kentucky, and finally Missouri, and some even farther west. So our family has been here a long time. However, that is not the case with so many. But we've found out that when somebody comes to us that's new and different, we are taught by so many things in our society today to be afraid. And I'm not sure what we're supposed to be afraid of. Because when we get to know people who are different from ourselves, we start to find out how much we really have in common. We all have family, we all have children, we all have loves, we all need love, we need opportunity. What is there to be afraid of? Most of us, if we take advantage of people, of getting to know people who are different from us, and in this college town that is easy to do. If we take advantage of those opportunities, we learn that it enriches our lives. We learn not to be afraid. We teach them not to be afraid. And fear is simply no longer an issue. It also has a double advantage in that it causes us to not be afraid to travel. And so we go to other countries, other parts of our own country, and learn the interesting things to be gotten along that way. I'll stop there and let Jack talk about more recent times.
Well, in my lifetime, I've had many experiences within the family that have caused me to realize how international all of us are. And the same thing that she said, it's kind of trite to say, but it's true. We are clearly a nation of immigrants.
Yes,
and that
sir.
has enriched us always, always. My sister, Marjorie, married a young man from South Carolina. They went to seminary and went to learn Chinese language at Yale, and ended up 12 years as missionaries in Singapore. And their children were born there. So they were immigrants to Singapore. And they then came back to the United States, totally enriched by the experiences they had. My mother took care of college students, and many students stayed at our house. And over and over again, the stories of some international students that stayed there. And I remember one, Maria, I believe her last name was Rodriguez. But Maria fixed the Costa Rican dinner for us on Sunday because she wanted to. And then she had such a good time at Truman, which was then Northeast Missouri State University, that she went back home. About 20 years later, she sent her daughter, who also stayed at Mother's house, and talked about her mother being here so many years earlier, attending the university. So those relationships are so powerful. And her family talked about the USA in such glowing terms, and they had wonderful experiences here. We had, at Truman, when I was on the faculty, we got to know a whole bunch of students from Thailand. And one of them spent a lot of time at her house. And he was so interested in education, and he did well at Truman, although Northeast Missouri State. He did well. And he went back and became a high-ranking official in the education department in Thailand. Now, the influence that he had there was tremendous, and it was all positive about the United States. So as a result of his time here and the way in which he was treated, he went back to be an ambassador for the USA in a high-ranking spot. Another one that was one of the persons that was named as the alumni of the year at Truman went back and became the city council chair of the city of Taipei. And we visited that place, and it was almost like a president's office. But that person had tremendous influence. He was a graduate of Truman, and he spread goodwill all over the place. And that happens over and over and over again.
Our niece was a student here and became acquainted with a young man from Iran who was also a student. Eventually they fell in love, married, and she went and lived in Iran for a while until during the time Iran was having the war with Iraq, she managed to get out of Iran and come back, and a couple of years later her husband also actually escaped from Iran, came to the United States, and they were reunited here. And I remember so well when they came for a visit and Esau got out of the car and almost ran toward me with a huge smile on his face. He had he had news to tell me. He had gotten his citizenship and he was eligible to vote. And it was the biggest red letter day his life had ever had. Moments like that are just unforgettable. Other experiences we had when Jack was president at Truman, we often had visitors for dinner who were giving programs on the campus. And some of the most memorable of those were visitors from foreign countries. One of them I remember was an anthropologist, archaeologist from England named Maeve Leakey. She and her father had worked in northeastern Egypt and had at that time discovered the oldest hominid remains on Earth. And she was quite famous in anthropology circles. Another one, and one of my favorites, was Lech Walesa. And he was the Polish dock worker who established the Solidarity Union to work against the excesses of the Soviet Union in Poland. Very, very dangerous work. And many of those who joined him and worked with him were killed because of what they did. He somehow survived. After the fall of the Soviet Union and Poland became a free state, he was the first elected president of Poland. He was a marvelous guest, so interesting, so warm-hearted, so common, I would say. We loved having him for dinner. Another one totally different, quite an aristocratic gentleman, was the curator of the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. This is the museum where the Dead Sea Scrolls are housed. It is also the place where the Holocaust Memorial is located. In the year 2000, we were able to visit that, and it made a searing impression on my memory that I will never forget. Later, Dr. Reutemann came to the United States, and we had him for dinner as well, and he was a charming guest. Ravi Araf, an Israeli archaeologist that worked with Truman students on a dig at Bethsaida, where he had been the archaeologist to actually establish the exact location of this ancient city where Jesus recruited the disciples, Peter and John. He was a wonderful guest and also gave us a marvelous tour of Israel when we were there. So these things work both ways. People who visit our country learn about us and hopefully take home positive reports, and we learn about them, and then when opportunity arises, we go visit their country and bring home positive reports, and we're no longer afraid of each other.
The world is really much smaller than most of us think it is, and these relationships that everyone has cause goodwill to be spread abroad and inside our own country, and everybody wins on those relationships. And at Truman, we had so many people that came. We had immigrants who were on the faculty. We have international students that bring tremendous riches to the university and to our community. And then we've had some people who were our best researchers. And I'm thinking of one that now at the University of Missouri at Rolla, who is one of our best. I thought he'd be our first Nobel laureate. But Yin Fama from China. And his wife both are researchers there, and they're doing wonderful work. And they're helping this country so much. And then at AT Still, we had physicians, students, and alumni DOs that go on missions around the world, and they realize how small the world is. And the purpose of them going is to help and to heal. Help and to heal. When that happens, then there's goodwill that's spread that comes back manyfold toward our country. And this whole concept of us sharing worldwide the good that we have to offer is something that we should never lose. And that ought to cause us to have such a good feeling for these great opportunities all of us have. I'm pretty proud of my grandson. He is a U.S. Marine. He's been to all the hot spots in the world. And he found a young lady from Nepal and married her. And they're in the process now, although he's deployed, they're in the process now of getting together all the work, so she's going to be a permanent resident and a citizen someday. And we're so delighted about this. Sue?
I have a story that, if there's time for it, it would be good. Sometimes it takes many years for these events to connect to each other and come to some sort of a conclusion. And with something that illustrates this is, when I was 9 years old, I read a book called Lost Worlds. And there was a section in it on ancient Egypt, which fascinated me. I can't even really remember what other ancient civilizations were talked about. But in the section on Egypt, there was a picture of Queen Hatshepsut's temple. And I thought that had to be the most beautiful building in the entire world. And someday I was going to go and see that. Well, the years went by. I grew up. Life happens. There was no time, no money to think about going to Egypt. But it was always in the back of my mind. For the period of time I served on the faculty at Truman, we had a colleague who had been enlisted by the country of Korea to write a curriculum for elementary mathematics for their Department of Education. And she spent a year in Korea doing that. While she was there, another U.S. faculty member from the University of Georgia was also there working for the Department of Education. The two of them got acquainted. Eventually, they each went back to their jobs in Missouri and Georgia. But later, this man contacted our colleague and said, "We have a group from the University of Georgia that wants to take a trip to Egypt. Would anybody there be interested?" You can bet who was the first person to sign up. And I saw Hatshepsut's temple. And it was just as beautiful as I imagined. And the ancient civilization that can still be viewed lets us know that there is an unbroken line from the peoples of ancient times right down to the 21st century in the USA. It's there. And what a wonderful opportunity we have to explore it.
Since our ancestors came in 1652, Sue and I have had a marvelous experience. We have been able to visit this whole world in so many ways. I had the opportunity to attend alumni gatherings in Tokyo and Taiwan and Busan, Korea, and all the places we've been. The Truman University is so honored and still so appreciated by those students who were here. And when I think of what's happening now with our students at Truman and the way this community treats them and the way they're welcomed, and I think about 10, 15 years from now, the goodwill that will still be spread in their home country is going to be just tremendous. Now, you've heard a lot of our story, but not all, but a lot of our story. But I'm really pleased that my ancestors came, obviously, and they came to America as immigrants. I get great inspiration about thinking about that. But you know, that's not the most important thing. I know how I was raised. I'm an American. I'm a citizen of this great state. I'm a member of a wonderful community. And I'm also a Christian. My whole life has been spent in ways watching and being encouraged to be kind and caring for one another. This has been instilled in me since I was a baby. Those are virtues. It's the right thing to do as individuals, as a community, as a nation. It's the right thing to do, to be that way. Does this phrase sound familiar? It's actually from 1 Corinthians 13, but it says something to the effect, these three remain, hope, faith, and love. And the greatest of these is love. Most of us believe that. What message does that mean? What's the meaning of that? It means love your neighbor, and in this world, the neighbor is not somebody a block away. It can be half a world away. That's what the neighbor is. What does it suggest? What's the meaning of this? Well, one of my old heroes, and I remember when he died, in April, I believe, might even be the 11th, but April 1945, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And I want to read to you what he said. The test of our progress is not whether we add more to the abundance of those who have much. It is whether we provide enough for those who have too little. Franklin Roosevelt. Now, much more closely that we can all relate to in this community is that one of the greatest heroes that ever walked the streets of Kirksville, Missouri was Dr. Andrew Taylor Still. I always remember the quote that he gave, and I made it my hallmark when I was privileged to work at ATSU. All I want to do is to extend the touch of the soft hand of human kindness to those in need. Andrew Taylor Still.